So sorry. I had some repairs done to my internet just a while ago, and somehow my mic had gotten itself unplugged. My bad. Just let me know if you can hear me now, and I'll start exactly from the beginning. Hopefully we'll just make up the time. Any sound? Sorry about that. Had a little mishap where my microphone cable had gotten pulled out. So I'll start over from the beginning. Welcome to ZBrush Live. Okay, welcome to ZBrush Live. I'm Tony Leonard. I'm a concept artist based out of Los Angeles, and I'll be hosting today this 4 o'clock hour to 6 on March 23rd, Saturday. Okay, so now that we're good on audio, let me just re-explain what I was explaining. 2019, bam, ZBrush, it's here. It is so good to have it here in the new 2019 fashion, which is pretty dope. So, in that dopeness, there's some really cool features, and one of the ones that I wanted to kind of go through, sort of backtracking to my last stream. If you guys go back on YouTube or Facebook and you watch the first one, I was doing a lot of work with Blender and tying that into ZBrush and how to do a little bit of hard surface design using Box Cutter by MasterZeon1001 and his Team C, which you can get the plugs or add-ons on Gumroad. I was using his tools in conjunction with ZBrush and bringing a lot of that topology over to ZBrush and kind of showing how to further sculpt on it or generate hard surface designs from it. Right? There was also using Moi. And anything that you can do to produce geo that has like some really cool booleans applied to it, or surface cuts, that sort of thing, you can bring it over to ZBrush now. And if you're neat about it, there's a certain workflow that you can use to make a lot of that geometry tangible inside of ZBrush 2019, and I want to show you that today. So there's that. But a lot of personal projects that I've been working on very heavily, I'm going to share with you today and kind of explain how that is affecting some of my workflow and heavily how it, what role ZBrush takes in doing that, right? So I'm going to show you guys a couple of things. I'm just going to hide ZBrush here. I'll get back to that, and we'll just close up a few things that we don't need. Okay, so I've been working on a few different motion pieces, trying to get more into motion design, right? So spaceships, suits, armor, that sort of thing, making mecha move, and I partnered up with a friend of mine, Chosen is his name, and Chosen and I on both YouTube, also Instagram, and a little bit on Facebook, have been starting to share some of the animations that we're creating. So this is where things get really, really interesting. So I'm going to lay out a couple of softwares, as I was going to probably say when my mic was out. A couple of different softwares that I'm going to probably dip into and out, in and out of, right? At its core, Blender and ZBrush are those two things to make a lot of the assets. I'm also probably going to dip into Cinema 4D every once in a while using Octane Standalone, Marmoset very heavily. I'm actually going to probably be showing here in the next few minutes, and then also using things in Premiere and also After Effects. So I'm actually going to start to turn into like a Swiss knife sort of workflow, a connoisseur of a Swiss knife, Army Swiss knifed workflow, which involves a lot of different apps. So stick with me. I'll try to explain everything that I can, but I'm going to let you guys kind of tag along as I build things. But first, without much ado, let's show you guys this. I'm just going to pause out some of this music really quick. Put it on chill mode for a minute, right? And I'm going to dip over to a playlist in VLC. Hold on a second. Oop. There we go. So these are just some, well, it doesn't want to come up. Hold on a second. There we go. Some animations that I've been putting together, and I put together a quick playlist to kind of show you some of the range of motions that I've been working through. So most of these are just like almost kind of like animatics, if you can imagine, or doing like a test to use a workflow where I go from ZBrush, also a lot of the texturing being done by Quixel, and being able to be UV'd. A couple of these projects I might try to find and open up, and I can show you exactly how they work. But I'm also going to be introducing you guys also to Mixamo. So in other words, how to get your ZBrush sculpt out of ZBrush, get it UV'd, and then how you could actually prepare it to drop into Mixamo and add simple animations in the form of FBXs, right? So this is some really advanced stuff, but maybe if you guys see me work through it here and there, I'll be putting together some scenes like this where there'll finally be some motion, right? This is a scene, just for example, that was completely animated in Marmoset toolbag 306. A lot of these were. And then rendered there out as image sequences, which I can then drop into After Effects. Let's see, maybe there's one more. So this is just a simple walk cycle that I recorded, just showing how to set up some pointillized light sources inside of Marmoset, right? Straight from the HDRI. Then rotating it and continuing the clip just for a test. This is also some work by my partner Chosen, and we're sort of throwing in one of the spinners from Blade Runner as sort of like an Easter egg. I think I purchased this one off of CG Trader. But a lot of the other environments were used with ZBrush and also Blender to create the arch pieces and the road. And then once I had those, a lot of the retopology was done inside of ZBrush 2019. So I've been really excited for a while now to talk about these features since 2019 dropped. And if you have any questions, let me know, because I'll kind of show you exactly what I do when I have to retopologize something coming out of almost anywhere. Moi, Fusion, both of those are typically going to be like triangulated styled, you know, very CAD styled bevels in triangulated form once you save out as OBJs, going over to ZBrush, right? So there's a couple of different methods, and one thing there's a little bit of a pitfall that I should probably mention that I'll get to later, in how to watch the beveling in your objects so that you don't have or incur errors when you come into ZBrush, and then try to put, you know, polygroups on certain objects, right? Because most of this will involve, just for example's sake, if I come over to Blender where I'm working now, this is a scene that is a cargo-based scene that I'm preparing as sort of a sequel to that previous clip, and right now I'm just using a low-quality viewer or viewport. It's not really rendering very high inside of Eevee right now. As you can see, a lot of the shadows and stuff are really low res and kind of choppy, although I can change this, right? So from here, you know, once I have a lot of pieces, some of these, if you look, if I was to select a piece, toggle overlays, and if I tab in, generally you can see that the mesh here of the piece that I'm using, I think this is one of Vitaly's platforms that I used from his Megastructures kit, but it had a nice walkway that was elevated, and I used it as a structural piece, right? Same for the floors. I think it's some of Vitaly's floor. I think it's like a collection of floor panel pieces. I think I used 2 or 3 varieties to just duplicate over an instance here in Blender. I could do probably the same thing in Cinema 4D. And so basically what I'm doing is just trying to go through and set up an active stage, or a movie set, perhaps, if you will. And this can happen very quickly between ZBrush and Blender. And you can kick a lot of your pieces. I think there's maybe a little bit of an unofficial GoZ called GOB, that or Go to Blender, which you can use to kick a lot of your geometry back and forth between the two. From Blender, probably typically you're going to save it as an OBJ and pull it back into ZBrush, but this is what the triangulated mesh of which will look like. But I'm going to show you guys actually how to bring a piece like this into, I think Paul has done a demo on this already in previous versions. I think it was 2018 when he did it. But now with the new ZRemesher algorithm out there, this gets really good because you can tighten a lot of these edges up, and I'm going to show you guys how. So basically when I build this, I'm just going to take a bunch of parts and then maybe I'll build some custom parts in ZBrush. There are some things maybe we have missing, like I would like to put in more consoles at or pit crew items down at the bottom of the shuttle, and maybe this will be a bulkhead, you know, and then basically I can put a plate or something for the exterior atmosphere or something. And in this shot I'm going to have a couple of people moving around in the same fashion, the same crew. Like, so when you saw this piece here, whoops, let's see, there we go. Sorry, when you saw this piece here, I'll turn the volume down, and let's jump frames here. Just for example's sake, this was all done in Blender Box Cutter, also ZBrush, and then bringing it back to Blender, I think I put some material definitions in, and then saved the set out as just one, probably half of the actual corridor. So in other words, I made one sectional that could be repeated over and over again to whatever length that I needed of track or hallway to make the corridor. And then, as you noticed later, there's a few characters here. One is this armored character, or my Titan Trooper as I called them, was completely sculpted in ZBrush. I'm going to open this up in just a sec, but everything here has UVs, and the texturing was done by Quixel. If you're unfamiliar with Quixel Suite, it's like a PBR styled texturing application that you can use within. It's actually a plugin for Photoshop, but it does a lot of really sweet baking and actually poly painting. That's pretty comparable to, like, say, you know, Substance Painter or something like that, where I can get some sort of real-world scanned materials onto some of these guys, right? And the female character, the sort of sci-fi worker here that surrounds this object that's floating about, this actually came out of Adobe Fuse. And so what I've been experimenting lately is taking some of the more sort of like template extras that I can really, really highly customize inside of Fuse, and then bringing those into ZBrush and resculpting them, because a lot of times when you export these models outside of Fuse, and Fuse, by the way, is still sort of like a beta type of application, but Adobe is developing it, and they offer a lot of like customizations for, like, say, the costumes, gloves, hats, goggles, pants, boots. You know, you could sort of mix and match different things. There's only one tiny little error with this clip, and that's right around here, around the subject's breast. There was like maybe it was too tight for it, and it's intersecting a little bit, so I'll have to fix and re-render this using a lot of the same tracks. But I wanted to hurry up and finish this so I could reach this date and present it to you guys and see what you think. So there are some emissive materials on here, all of this done in Marmoset. So let's take a look at the actual scene file, and I'll show you what it looks like. So if I flip over to Marmoset, and give me 1 second, I'm gonna just open this up. Corridor scene. Any questions, guys, so far? Or, I hope you can follow along with me. But if you don't understand what I'm babbling about, just please stop me for a second on the chat. I would be more than willing to answer. So give me just a second while I load this scene. Okay, and here we go. So this is a hallway scene, a different scene that I put together than the one that I just showed you, but primarily it works the same. It's the same corridor set, and it can actually show, you know, kind of a little bit about how it was built. So if I tap on this, I can barely and faintly see the wireframe And a lot of these are like Ngon style meshes, right? Because Blender, a little bit different than ZBrush, actually doesn't read, it reads polygons just maybe a little bit slightly different. Like a lot of the Ngons or 5-sided polys or more than 5-sided polys that you would find in Blender or maybe a different CAD style program are pretty much recognized, right? It'll all close the geometry manifold in those applications. But when you send it over to ZBrush or something like that, you need to save the model out, triangulate it. So just keep that in mind when you're exporting any type of object out of ZBrush and back and forth between Blender. You probably want to get a triangulated OBJ to come back to ZBrush so that you can make sure that your manifold mesh is all closed up with no holes, right? Because a lot of times when you have, you know, very complex boolean cuts that you do, or, you know, cuts in the geo, sometimes every once in a while, depending on how things are stacked between bevel and bevel, it's like basically almost like this, right? And then a bevel has a smooth curve, so however many steps you set the bevel to, if those intersect, every once in a while they can sort of jam up the mesh inside of Blender, right? And then by the time you get to ZBrush, it just looks like a total mess. So I'm going to kind of show you guys a few things about how to get some basic, you know, hard surface cuts, doing things this way into ZBrush, and then get it retopologized into something maybe you can use. So let's just go, I'm going to go over to Blender really quick, and I'm just going to grab like a new file, right? I have ZBrush open, and I'm going to kick this, you know, just like a test object over, right? So let's say, you know, I get going, I take and maybe stretch this out, right? Hit tab, and I'm going to start box cutter, which is Alt W, right? And I can really just start working one side of this. I'm going to tab into edit mode, grab this, maybe put a bevel here, and start shaping this object, right? So I'm just going to do like a few minutes of box cutting, and then I'm going to switch over to ZBrush, because I know basically our mandate is to, you know, talk and feature some of the great new things with ZBrush, and so I want to get to that. But, oops, let's see, do GY, give this a nice little swoop, maybe take here and put a bevel here, right? And so that's kind of a neat, cool looking shape to kind of start with. It could be part of like a block up or like a turret or something like that. But now we want to get into more complex cuts and whatnot. So I'm going to use box cutter's box shape. And while I have the object selected, I'm going to hold Control and pull and go down and start doing a few cuts, like a few designed cuts. I'm just using a red box, which is basically a subtractive box that would just take out of the, you know, take and carve out a piece of the geometry. And all of these are basically modifiers. So like if you boys and girls who use 3ds Max, it's very similar to something like that, right? So I'm going to take this and actually hit B so I can bevel it, right? And then I'm going to drop it right there. And before I drop it, there's two things that you should probably know. In Blender, using this workflow, there's going to be some things that are additive and, you know, or actually more so destructive and non-destructive, excuse me. So I'm just going to actually back up really quick, and I can actually show you. I'll escape that and go back one. So if I was to actually just take, hold Control, red box this, go down, and cut, that would be a destructive cut, because the box is no longer live. It's already been committed to the geometry, and when I tab in, well, after I commit the modifiers, if I tab in, this will be just a straight up, you know, edge and, you know, vertexes at each point, so forth and so on, right? But I'll undo this, tab out, do this. There we go. And so now let's just take the shape. I'm going to hold Control again. I'm going to pull out a box, put it in, do a bevel, right? And these edges will basically be the edges that will be in our geometry at the end. So I'm just going to take this, hold it, click once. It's still active, but now I'm going to go from Control to holding Shift and just clicking it. And this will leave a live box for me to have. And I can actually change this, you know, like if I wanted to move it around on the y-axis, if I wanted to move it up on the z-axis, and just make like a small light impression, I can do that, and then hit H to just hide the object. It's not gone, it's still inside of here, and I actually don't want to move this object here. Like say, if I grab the main object and I start moving it around, that other object is still non-destructive and live, and therefore it's not going to move with this. So I would actually have to Alt-H and show it, and then therefore start to move this around or move both objects together, right? So I'm going to go back right about there. And of course I have symmetry, so I can actually start, you know, making a few cuts. Oops. Do that. This, do that, I'll do this, oops, there we go, and I'll do this, and I'll hit Shift, hold that one, hide. And so each time it's sort of like a rinse and repeat, but when I make a selective cut, each time I'm designing into the mesh, each of these modifiers is accessible through a modifier helper, right? So I can hit, I believe it's Control tilde, and that will be the hops helper. And then basically I can take that and, you know, see what my modifiers are, or start applying some of them and collapsing the list, so forth and so on. So let's just make a few cuts really quick, and then I'll take this piece and I'll send it over to ZBrush, and then we can see how we can work with it. So I'm going to use, you know, select it again, maybe use box again. I'm going to take and draw out this box using Control, and this time I'm going to hit X, which will actually turn it into a slice box. And then what I can do is slice it, and this will actually be, in the end, an independent piece, because when I save out, I'm actually going to be applying modifiers to the saved OBJ. Alright? So I can take this piece, and it's a separate piece now. As far as the modifier is concerned, I can still kind of come in, hit D, box, come in here, make a stepped cut, right? And cut right through that. So I'm gonna, oops. Actually, let's do that again. Z, bring it up, hide that, take this, I'm going to select this piece, use the cutter, cut in, right? Actually that was a non-destructive, that was a destructive cut, so I'm going to go back, and I just want to slice just a little piece off the end. So I'm going to hold Shift, hold that, and if it's still live, what I can do is I can move it around, which is something that I want to do. And I can click here again, make it with another cut. We could have something like a panel, right? A lot of times when working inside of Blender as well, like if I'm doing some concepting and stuff like that, and it's going to be Blender only, a lot of times what I can do is I can put it on for preview purposes, but really you don't want to kick it over to ZBrush this way, because in the end it could cause a lot of problems, and that was the pitfall I think I spoke of before, but I'm just going to show you. And that's basically where, if you make a piece of geometry like a cut or something here in Box Cutter with Blender, one of the things that I need to be careful of is if I go into Hard Ops, right, the other mode by hitting Q, if you have both installed, right, I'm going to go and do like a C sharpen, which actually puts sort of like a bevel modifier on the edges of these things, right? And you can see it's spaced here because the bevel is actually set pretty wide, but if I hit Q again, and then B, and then apply a B width, basically just scrolling back and forth, I can make this sort of like a nice rounded edge, you know, like it's been filed or polished, and then it won't be absolutely sharp, because, you know, like a lot of times that I say, hard surface stuff is kind of interesting when you're working in 3D. You may think that it has an absolute sharp edge, but there's plenty of surfaces that where iron or steel is molded into shape, and you probably don't have absolute like laser cut shapes. Speaking of laser cut, there is an actual feature inside of this add-on called laser cut, where I can just make a red box, click it, and before I move it or give it an extrude, it'll just take that cut from one side to the other and just automatically cut it, which is really, really handy for a lot of things. So, and also, I'm just going to go to the side view here. So let's just like kind of just cut like some modular like cut lines into this, or production lines into this, and we'll see how it kind of comes up. Because one of the things that I can do is hit also an Ingon tool, draw tool, and as long as the object is selected, I can hold control and just come along, keeping control held down. I'll cut here, a red box, right? And finally, you're going to get this in just, I think it's left click it, should disengage it. And so now, basically, I'm going to slice this, not red box it. I could red box it into a certain thickness or anything like that, or cut it straight off just like this with a red box, but really what I want to do is get some kind of paneling going, so I'm going to use the yellow box, which you can do by just hitting X and toggling on the keyboard. So red and yellow, right? So yellow being the actual slice, right? And I'm going to click this, and it sliced it all the way through. Nice clean cut. And then I can come back, side view again, and this time I can actually make surfaces. So what if we wanted to extrude out and maybe build more geo or plates off of this? So I'm going to hit D on the key and go to the actual like pie menu, where I can choose like circle, box, and Ingon. And there are some other modes that you should probably look at Master Xeon 1001's YouTube for a deeper meaning and explanation of this interface. But just to cover the basics, because I want to get on to ZBrush, I'm going to go ahead and just hit Ingon, and I'm just going to make like a shape on this shape, holding control. And so I'm going to click along sort of the same shape language that's built into this. What do we call it? Like a turret. Alright, and so that's on the surface, and now I'm actually going to hit, I believe it's J, which will be the green box, and the J key activates it, and then I'm going to hit O to basically extrude outward rather than E to extrude inward, and I'm going to pull this out just a little bit. And this is basically sort of like a make shape box that I can use with the Ingon draw tool. I can clean this shape up so that I can close it and it can actually make more topological sense, and I can also bevel it as I please. So I'm just gonna put this on here, and actually we're really just working on one side, so I'm actually gonna show you how you can pull some symmetry off the other side there. So anyway, green box, right? Green box is going to be a live object. I'm going to hold shift, click it, and it goes through to the other side, right? So now I need to actually scale this, so I'm going to hit S, X, bring this back in, and I only want half the distance because I'm going to mirror it, right? So now, if I wanted to, I can hit G, X, bring this shape out a little bit more, and I can hit Tab, and actually I'm going to hit 2 just for edges selection. Click here, Control B, bevel it, maybe something like that. Right? And if the shading gets a little bit funky on some of these objects, then you might notice that you have some trouble somewhere. This is not so bad. It's actually just, I'm actually selecting by edge, and the shader is being goofy while I turn it. But if I tab out, it's perfectly fine object so far. Right? So now that I've got this, I'm going to hide and disengage the actual shape from the modifier, and it will weld itself with the actual larger shape, right? So I could do anything to this primarily, or just use it for concepting, different shape languages, which is sort of the added benefit. Okay, so anyway, let's get this, everything from this, and hit Alt X, Oops, actually, let's do that again. When I hit Alt X, is it messing up? Here, hold on a second. I'm gonna save this, and I'm gonna call this test shape. All right. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to use this and save Blender file. Oh, let's get our tunes back up just a wee bit. Okay, so back to Blender. I'm going to save this file. I'm actually going to close this out really quick and reopen it because I think I was having some problems displaying this. Save that, close out all of my Blender instances, and reopen it. And I'll open the last. Yep. There we go. And I'll hit Control W again, or excuse me, Alt W, which starts box cutter up again. And now I think things should work a little bit better. For some reason, it was acting a little hinky, and so I just do a nice, refresh. Just looking at it in sort of like an X-ray view. And okay, so I'm gonna hit Alt X, which should have brought up a different widget. I'm not sure exactly why this is happening. Hold on a second. I'll take this. Maybe I need to actually do location, rotation, and scale. Yeah, still messing around. Hold on a second. I'm not sure exactly why this geo is being weird. This, oops. I'll do box. Oh, now everything's hidden. Okay. So I'm gonna actually take this. Oh. Hide that. And we'll take. Sorry, I think box cutter actually had some shapes that it was trying to draw off to the side. Okay. There we go. So this actually just needs to have its location, rotation, and scale reset. And then once that happens, I should be able to hit Alt X and duplicate it. But for some reason, there's a piece that's causing its axis to be off, and that's why that's happening. Sorry about that. So let me just get this and delete that. And I think now, if I select this, location, rotation, and scale is what is being applied, and then oh no, something happened again. Sorry about that. Hold on. Part of the problem was right. Sorry about that. Let's just try to see. Sorry, just one sec. I think yep. Trying to look and see everything from all of the chats on Realstream, but I think it's acting a bit strange. Sorry about that. Okay, so anyway, let's go back. I'll take this. For some reason the handle is not coming out. My bad. So I'm not exactly sure, but it doesn't matter because when I get to ZBrush I could probably just mirror and weld it anyway. So let's just take this actually because I don't want to spend too much time on this part just alone. And we'll export it, and I'm actually going to save it out as a OBJ. And just to be sure, you know, whenever going to ZBrush, I'm actually going to just click selection only, smoothing groups maybe. Let's see, polygroups for sure, triangulate faces, and material groups. So there's only one material on it, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. But we'll actually just save this out as an OBJ, and then I'll go over to ZBrush. Right. So once in ZBrush, I'm not going to actually go through, you know, any of the spotlight stuff yet, or the lightbox or anything like that. Sorry. I'm just going to take this out, and I'm going to click on Polymesh 3D star, pull it out, hit D, come up to the tool, hit import, and then go looking for the actual OBJ where I had saved just before. So, yep, there we go. I'll open that, and it says the mesh imported contains unused vertices. I'll hit yes, and we'll see exactly kind of how it came out. So it didn't come out too bad. It's actually quite intact, right? And if I look at the polygroups, there are 1, 2, 3 visible polygroups, right? And because we're on axis, actually this was done on probably the negative X rather than the X side of things. So actually I should probably mirror it and then mirror it again to weld it, mirror and weld it, right? So deformation, mirror, and then probably coming up to geometry, going down to modify mesh, or modified topology actually, and then mirror and weld, right? And that got it all at the center, right? So we're sitting pretty good here. And then what we have now is how are we going to break this object up by its polygroups, because we have 3 solid polygroups here. So what I'm going to actually do is just take these, and I'm going to do a group split, which should give us 3 different subtools, right? So subtool and split, and then group split, right? So now working this piece, I would just split it, and if I kept the part pretty simple, I have 3 major chunks. And so let's just go dynamic solo, and I'll just take a look at one. Now if you look at this shape actually maintained the bevel modifier that was applied, but actually this is probably a no-no. And when I saved it, I can save it again just to take a look at it, but this actually will cause a lot of problems. Why is because part of the process in getting this ZRemeshed is that I need to have probably some cleaner edges for it to detect, to make actual polygroups and have them stick. Because one of the things that you're going to need to do is go into, not the ZRemesher, but actually, sorry, hold on a second. I need to go down to the polygroups menu and then polygroup by normal, right? And you can check and uncheck this, and sometimes you get different varying results. But this small button here, if you notice, some of the angles might be a little bit different by clicking it and not clicking it. But one of the things that you can do is probably, it'll start by a default of an angle of 45, but you know, usually I start with something a little bit lower, like maybe you know, 8 to 10 degrees, or let's say 10 degrees, or 12 degrees, right? Lower number. And then I will group by normal. And as you can see, what it's trying to do is every outward facing normal, it has a polygroup on it, right? And sometimes we can grab those strays. In this case, there's a bevel modifier on it, and so it's actually trying to do it to the actual, like, outward, you know, softer faces along the edge. And that can get very complex when you're trying to hone each polygroup into a major solid and then be able to have that for ZRemesher. So let's go back one step. We'll come back here, I don't know what is going on. I must have misclicked something. But anyway, let's see here. We'll hide these guys. We'll hide these. This and this. Gotta get in here real close and grab these guys. And we'll hide this. And we'll hide this. Right? And so now, if I look at this, still the same 1, 2, 3 arrangement. Hey, let me see if I can grab just one. I can. And do symmetry. How about that? So, I must have done something wrong previously. Maybe it was the order in which I was trying to do it. But now I can symmetrize from here and keep all of those pieces pretty even. So no need to mirror and weld over in ZBrush, right? Because it's already there and it's perfectly spaced here, right? Plus we could make a few more cuts. But actually, I'm going to open up that mirror, the hops helper or modifier helper that we had before. And I think I want to click here and actually just hide some of these modifiers. That's the mirror. That's the weight. Let's take that off. There we go. I think that's the only one that I had, so I'll just take that one off and I'll resave it, right? Because without any type of smoothing, it's not going to have a problem trying to find the normal. It's only when I put in extra bevels that those faces get really messed up. So I'm going to select this and re-export it. Right? Same name, same everything. Triangulate, polygroups, material groups. Really don't have any material groups yet, but I can show you where that is important, especially when you're getting to your rendering. All looks good. Okay, so export. Come back over to ZBrush, and I'll just import right over the old stuff, right? I'll merge this down, maybe. There we go. And then we'll just re-import over the entire thing. There we go. So there's perfectly the mesh that we built. If I hide the polygons, it's kind of harder to see the seams where it was cut without a bevel, but they are actually completely two different objects. And know that because this is triangulated, if I try to subdivide it or anything using dynamic subdivision or anything like that, it's probably going to look a mess. Especially if a lot of verts are not exactly connected by edge to open areas that are ingons and so forth. And all of these are solved, with triangulation, right? So I'm going to hit always OK. It would probably subdivide like this, which is really, it's like, what's going on with this thing? It's crazy looking. So let's go back. And this is where we want to use ZRemesher. So I'm going to show polygroups. I'm actually going to shift and get rid of, and hit D and get rid of the dynamic subdiv preview. And I'm just going to take this and I'm going to do a group split just like before. And now I have a major solid piece, right? And it's got some nice bevels here on the edge. But everything is one polygroup. So this is where, again, polygroup by normal comes into play. Right? So if you could do this, actually a lot of things that you work from concept meshes from Blender become very usable and editable elsewhere, because it'll just make the topology right back in good quad order. It's a vast improvement in ZRemesher 3. So I'm going to go down to polygroups, and I'm going to do group by normals. And as you can see here, every flat planar surface has perfectly been turned into a polygroup, right? I can even, I didn't actually turn on symmetry, but I should have. And let's do it again. I'm going to change this maybe to 8. Let's see what we get. Right, so that's pretty slick. And then maybe what I can do is here's another one where there were some crazy faces made from triangulation on a beveled face, right? It's created a few tries in that bend there. That's okay. We're just going to try to run it anyway. So now I could tighten this if I wanted to, maybe bring it up. So I'll say maybe 22. Maybe I can turn this off and try it again. And see that it's getting more and more solid, so let's try 18 degrees. Still not yet. Let's try 12. Maybe bigger. So 28. Yeah, that's right. So maybe 36. Almost. I could say merge similar groups, but actually it went the other way. So let's see. I'll turn this back on, and we'll do 36 and see what happens. That's a little bit more definitive. Okay, so let's just try it there, because I think every flat area is pretty much different. No need to make them the same. I think that's probably good. And now, let's try a few things with ZRemesher. So, with ZRemesher, what I have is I'm going to turn on Detect Edges. And also I'm going to keep this maybe fairly low, but I'm going to try maybe 8 for starts. As a I guess that would be 8,000 for the polygon count. I'm going to leave adaptive on, but I'm going to kick it up maybe to, let's say 80. And then the curve strength, I'm not using curves, so I'm going to actually make that 0. And if you had creases, you could probably keep creases into your geometry. But in this case, what I'm going to do is, and this is something that I learned from Paul Gabry, is keep groups and sliding this smooth group slider all the way down to 0. Because if you do this, basically it doesn't bring in any smoothing to where, you know, it's going to start beveling any of the edges or anything like that, right? It'll just keep the groups, the polygroup shapes, and detect the actual edges of all, you know, all of the flat planar areas, and it's basically going to run its algorithm and turn it from triangulation, a triangulated styled mesh, into more of a quad mesh. So that's something that we can, you know, maybe take into another package and start editing, or if we want to subdivide it and put in reinforcement loops, keeping things sort of more organized, you can certainly do that. And especially, you know, like if you're really actually doing this so that you can have something as a base to sculpt on, it's a nice clean way to sort of get things back into order, and then, you know, subdivide and keep going, right? So let's do this, and then we'll take ZRemesher, hit it, let's see what comes out. Might take a second to calculate. Everyone good? Follow me so far? Let me know if you guys have any questions or anything. So I know it's a lot of explaining, but I kind of want to get to a point where I can show you guys how I've been building a lot of stuff. It's not just, you know, all Blender or all ZBrush. It's a combination of a bunch of things that I'm using together, and I think it would be interesting, you know, just to sort of widen the horizon and show you what each task you can kind of, what you can use to perform those workflows. So anyway, I'm not sure actually that worked for the size, so I'm gonna actually up this a little bit number wise. Here, I'll shift and M. Basically, this is the ZRemesher panel, and I'm keeping groups, changing the smoothing group down to 0, detect edges. I'm using adaptive, but you know what? Actually, let's try a little bit of an experiment here. Now that I think of it, get rid of the loop tool there. I'm gonna lower this significantly and just maybe hit 5. Sorry about that. And let's try to do it again. So I'm going to ZRemesh it again. Boom! There it goes. So it didn't even need a higher number. It probably needed a lower number to cut it down. Depending on the complexity of the shape, sometimes a simple number will do. And this is it ZRemeshed. And now perfectly I could be able to take this and probably, you know, if I wanted to, you know, take a few loops out, or I didn't like the polyflow, I mean, still, you know, it's something that I could actually put, you know, a few loops on and actually get it kind of squared away. but you could even maybe lower this and see what kind of performance you get, you know, as far as the actual target number, right? But this is light enough, really, as well, because, like, you know, if you had a heavy mesh that's Dynamesh, or if it's triangulated or even decimated, every once in a while there's so many faces that it can really get kind of inefficient. And, you know, even for hard surface, where you think that a lot of flat surfaces wouldn't, they would look pretty clean with just, like, you know, of course having quads, but if it, you know, has, you know, like triangulation in it, sometimes it'll be pretty clean, but it really won't have any type of nice, like, aliasing, because the faces are kind of cut funky or anything like that. So let's just do this, right? We've ZRemeshed it, and then now I'm gonna unhide the other tools. I'll go over to those and quickly repeat the process, right? Dynamic solo, look at it, have some small cuts on the inside of that, okay? Polygroups, and I'll do it once more. Groups by normals, right? And I'm going to use the same 12 degree and try it. It's pretty much there. All of the nice flat surfaces were caught really well. And let's just try to go ahead and ZRemesh it and see what happens. So keep groups, smoothing groups down to 0, detect edges, I'll leave it at 5, adaptive, I'll do 80 or 90, curve strength 0, doing this in, of course, symmetry, and let's try it, ZRemesh it. Boom, there it goes. Now every once in a while you might get like a small spot that kind of looks a little bit strange. You could try a few different numbers and see, you know, maybe, you know, the polygon count, if it had a little bit more, it would entirely cover the face, you know, from edge to edge. But every once in a while you get a few tweaked little areas like this, and you can always check them out, of course. You know, you can hit D, which will throw in the dynamic subdiv, and you can look at it and see sort of how it, like, polished out. In this case, you know, like, I'll shift F and get out of polyframes and sort of look at it. And then, you know, a lot of this softness that you're seeing here is the same kind of thing that I would get in Blender when I actually did the bevel modifier anyway, to sort of, I think as you mentioned, or if you look at the screen previously, it was like B-width was the item, which you actually throw like sort of like a bevel around things, but this way it sort of softens out through subdividing it just once, right? And probably if I add a reinforcing loop again in here, it'll probably even just keep the width of the smoothing just a little bit sharper or a little bit looser, depending on how I place it, right? So, okay. Shift D, going out of that one. Out of solo again. I think our last piece was this one. And I'll dynamic solo in. And this, of course, I will polygroup by normal. Good enough. And actually, let's change this number. Let's see what happens if I said 2.5 maybe, right? And ZRemesh it. So actually, I'm not sure. Maybe a little bit more dense. Maybe a little bit less. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, so maybe a little less. It's actually looking a little dodgy around the corner, so probably want to give it a little bit more. Everything is good selection-wise. So let's do 5. You know what? Let's do more than that. Let's do 8. Keep groups. Smoothing edges, or smoothing groups down to 0. Keep groups and delete, detect edges. Curve strength down to 0, adaptive up, and I'll try this. Right, so pretty nice and clean, right? No tries, at least so it seems. But at least, you know, it's a fairly, you know, decent bit of mesh that, you know, considering that it's, you know, automated. So, okay, moving right along, we take this. And so this is basically, you know, you can do the same thing to something that was like a kit bash piece or something like that. Actually, let me flip this. For some reason, I think one side actually got bigger than the other somehow, somewhere. Probably I need to take this and mirror and weld it. So I will take the chance to do that. Right? And then we have equal sides. And then of course, you know, you could use this and just keep going. You could do some live boolean stuff like let's try this. And we'll get into ZBrush's boolean system. So like if I use an IMM of just primitives and then I hit M and I get like an H cube or like a Q cube, right? And I take these and move them in. And then what I'm going to do is just push these ever so slightly inward, right? And once I have those, I'm going to actually split them because they're actually joined to the subtool, right? You have to actually split them apart, especially when you're using an IMM, right? And so now I have a cutter piece, basically. Oops. And yikes. Accidentally duplicated a piece. There we go. These guys I'll actually hide because I might need them again. And I'll take this guy and basically see if it's below this guy, which it seems to be. And then basically I'll take this and make it a start object and take this and make it a Boolean object, right? So all things being in a group, I'm going to take this actually and put it above, right? And later I can put all of these into a folder, right? So if I have miscellaneous pieces that I'm not presently using, I can kind of shift things around and then maybe take this, or no, sorry, this, make it a folder, so new folder, and I'll just say parts 001, right? I can hide these others. And one of the things, I don't know if you guys noticed, but you'll have to excuse me, my son is getting a little crazy. Anyway, right here where you have like a little cog, if you push this, you'll notice probably the transpose sets, transpose add, sub, duplicate, merge up. So there's a lot of new features with just, you know, the folder alone. And a lot of times you can use these and just collect up all of your subtools that you have for one specific subtool that you want to represent. Like maybe you want to pose like a mecha arm or something, and there's so many pieces that, you know, you have to put them in a folder to make larger chunks that you can move and pose around. Well, then you can add them to a transpose set, and, you know, you can make them additive, subtractive, that sort of thing. So this one I'm just making a straight up folder, and I'm actually making a live Boolean set out of some of these pieces, right? So this piece will be have the smaller boxes cut out of it, and so I need to actually find these guys and make sure that they go in the folder, right? And then from there I'm actually going to make it move down. This one needs to go in the folder, and I'm going to actually pull it down. Actually, that's the same shape, so this actually can go, I think. Yes, there's a duplicate, so we take it, just delete it, just the start, and then the boxes, right? And so with these, I'm going to go over to render booleans, live boolean. And so now that I do that, if I hide polygroups, we'll start to notice that here the live boolean is being cut out of the shape, right? Although it looks kind of like it's almost an illusion, but it's there. It's just that the shape was so flat, and it's creating a reverse on the, maybe like a shadow on the inside. But it's actually just a flat face, or at least it should be. So, but you gotta toy with it a little bit sometimes. But yeah, basically that's kind of how live booleans work. And then of course you keep that pattern up, and then maybe you might kick this back and do some more work in hard ops. Okay, so that's pretty much kind of how I built a lot of the assets, you know, for the corridor. I created just one section of the corridor here, box cut it, brought it into ZBrush and did a few other things, and then saved in the end a triangulated mesh, bringing it into Blender, and then applying different materials to the surfaces. So like this orange part is maybe like has an emissive material on it. The walls have like maybe 2 or 3 different types of metals on it. And then there are these guys with their associated maps. These guys were pretty much rendered. The maps were done in Quixel, and then I took the base mesh that has like UVs on it, and I put it into Mixamo. So kind of one of the things that I wanted to show. Let's do this. If you're unfamiliar with what Mixamo is, it's basically an Adobe product, and it allows for making like some sort of simple customized 3D characters that you can use in your projects. But it also handles like you know, uploading of meshes, so that you can make some of your own customized, you know, walk cycles or something. And if you're savvy enough with doing weight painting, I think it respects weight painting on the model, so that you don't get much stretching and craziness. And sometimes when you have like organic mixed in with soft surface design and stuff like that, or hard surface design with organic stuff in a mix, like armor or anything like that. One of the things that I'll show when I show this is like there are some areas in which I think the mesh actually kind of bent a little weird. Like if the torso bends, maybe the tiny bit of the vest, which is supposed to be hard, is actually stretching. But you know, things to hone in on. So I'm just going to sign in really quick. Oops. Hold on a second. Yep. I'm supposed to sign in, not sign up. I'm already signed up. Log in. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So Mixamo sort of looks like this. It's a page that has a series of thumbnails of different actions. You can even search for some, like a walk cycle. You can say walking. And you can get some samples of male and female. And I think probably by default I have a female version of my Titan Trooper that I'm working on, and just so as a basic mesh, I'm going to use this one, just to sort of show you guys what it looks like. And I'm going to say animate in place, and here we go. So it's probably a little, my frame rate is probably a little choppy because I'm streaming with you guys and have a couple of other heavy apps open. But basically this is sort of, you know, how I get a lot of ZBrush sculpts that I've been working on into Mixamo, right? And so, you know, when I have things like an animatic scene where I need somebody walking, I can basically upload the model, apply one of these types of walk cycles to it, and then, you know, I can sort of tweak it, you know, overdrive being the speed or energy that you put into in animation, or you know, the cycle in the animation, the arm spacing is somewhat I can change. Let's see if I can get probably female walk cycle in place, right? And if I change the sway in the arms, the arm spacing becomes a little bit more apparent. And if I hit overdrive, of course, she's going to start walking really fast. Scooching along. There we go. A little bit slower. And we can mirror it also, just flip it, you know, from one side to the other. leading with the other foot. I think this way is fine, but you can do that. And then once you have it, you can just download it. Say if I download it, it will actually turn into an animation. So it's actually an FBX with an animation attached, and there is a rig on the model. So simple rigging technique. I have some friends that I've been working with that have actually converted some of the Mixamo rigs to actual real rigs. So like if you're using any other 3D package, Maya, Blender, Cinema 4D, there can be a conversion of the rig itself over to an actual usable rig with IK and all that good stuff, actual bones inside of it. So anyway, I'm going to turn this over to a 60 frame per second animation, FBX with skin, no keyframe reduction, excuse me, and then I'll download it, right? And it'll go straight into my download folder, and I'm going to keep that there for a minute, right? So now I'm going to go back over to Marmoset, and just to show you how some of these animations work, because they're really they're pretty cool. Like if you try them out on just like a test scene, or you have like a cool model, you want to see, you know, how does this model move? You know, how does this topology move on the mesh? You know, like, does it work, or do I need to solve anything? It's a good way to kind of solve any of the sort of building of a mesh, because you can kind of see how it bends, how it moves, without having to spend time putting an actual realistic rig on it, right? And so I'm using these to actually try to build some cinematic experiences. In short, like little small 30-second bits, right? So if I collect enough of these, then maybe it'll get longer and I'll turn it into something. But for now, that's how a lot of these guys work, right? If I was to hit play here, these two guys are on a similar walk cycle on the outside, and this guy is one idle pose. And the front guy, actually, it's hard to see that he's moving, but he actually does have like an actual idle pose, excuse me. So I'm going to stop this, hit pause, I'm going to say new, I'm not going to save that, and let's see, we will actually hit Control I and just import our FBX character from before. So I'm going to go into my downloads and just get the last walk cycle, should be right, and open it. And I don't think I have maps for this yet, but it's just a mesh sort of demo. But if I hit play, you can see where she walks, right? Maybe under sky, I can start to put like some pinpointed lights, just to drive sort of the ambient light on the character. But once you start putting maps and everything on this, it looks really, really nice. You could actually sculpt up a lot of these shells that Fuse makes, and create like an all-new. You just use the base mesh as a new base mesh to base a new, you know, costume edit off of, and just maintain and keep the UVs, and it will probably fit in the same deal. But basically this will be like a figure that has, if I was to pose it or anything like that, or work with it, you can actually use Mixamo to do a perfect T or A pose, and then take those FBXs and use them as a guide to base your models off of, like if you need to sculpt them or, you know, put them somewhere else. So a lot of this kind of comes like almost sort of like a template. It becomes sort of easy to use, where you can take, you know, some of your own characters or custom Fuse meshes and bring them into Mixamo, get some movement out of them, get an A pose, sculpt that up, and then put, you know, a lot of those assets back in place and throw it through Mixamo again, and then probably you can add some animations, right? So yeah, that's kind of how something like this works, right? And so it's like a nice, neat little walk cycle, female walk cycle. So I'm still messing around this because I want to add like a vest and stuff. I think it looks a little weird just being a sleeve top and such a helmet. It's kind of a nice gag. But as far as like a lot of the other ones that I've done, here, let me just toss in a few more. I'll pause this, rewind back to the same. And you can actually, I didn't know this until very recently, and so I had to do a bit of a cramming session. But you can actually animate in Marmoset. It's pretty crazy and it's pretty dope. And you can, it has like a keyframe system with a dope sheet, and you can actually look at it and adjust it, like along a curve. I would go out on YouTube. I think the Marmoset guys had put together a video showing a lot of their animation techniques. So it has to do with like the keyframe and timeline. And then along here you can probably add keyframes, toggle your keyframe, and so forth and so on. So let me show you the complex scene first that I was working on from the video. Not those guys. I think it was this guy. Sorry, I'm gonna load up a scene really quick and show you guys. Thank you. Yeah, it's a kind of a way for a tool to work, but I always love explaining like workflow stuff with you guys, especially if it involves heavily ZBrush and then a mix and variety of other tools. But I'll kind of show you some breakdowns of what I've been working on lately. So this is the corridor scene that you guys first saw, and I'll show you if I back up. Oh, my camera's kind of stuck. Let me see here. Frame scene. There we go. So arg, come on, get in there. Let me just select a piece and then I'll frame that selection so it's a little. It's like way too far back. Every once in a while, also between app to app, always be careful of scale. It sometimes gets a little funky. But I also have like a weird camera on this project. So basically this is the starting point of this project. This is where all of the figures kind of came together. And what you're seeing is, in my shelf here, in the outliner, I actually have just one half of a corridor, and it's been grouped together in a folder, right? So if I pull this down, there's actually all of this geometry with all of the cuts and slices titled as they were cut, and it's going to actually show me individual tiny pieces that I can actually access, like little, small wall pieces, right? But I've just copied it over and flipped it, and then duplicated those two flips, and then put them all into various folders, right? The same thing would be for the group formation, and if I actually select it and play it, you'll start to see them walk down the hall, right? And all of this, if I look at the keyframes, there are actually keyframes in this. Hold on a second. It's kind of hard to see, but each one of these strokes is probably a keyframe, and this is like my timeline and how far I've stretched it out, right? So the number of frames to 582, and then, once I render, all I have to do is just render frames, or render or export video. Actually, I think it's under capture, you can hit F5 for video, but you probably want to check your settings first. My settings personally are 1920 by 1080. I do a PNG source with 16x sampling. Only takes like maybe 15 minutes for this whole entire scene, just to render out, like a few seconds, all the frames as image sequences at 60 frames per second, basically, right? And the quality is pretty high, like 80. So it comes out fairly sharp, and you can set, things up inside of it, your maps. All of these were actually substances from Fuse that I changed the color of. I still have some work to do on the suit so that there's no intersection of geometry here. But, I go around the scene, sort of pick my own, POV that I want. The sled, or the repair sled as I call it, is just an object that had been kit bashed. I threw in some emissives here. And I think actually the body of the sort of like sled's sarcophagus shape was done kind of as a throwback head nod to Han Solo's carbonite hovering sled. You know, when he was frozen in carbonite and they're walking him by, and it's just floating. It's sort of like a head nod to that, but you know, it's basically supposed to be sort of like a repair barge that floats and has like a workstation on it, and a couple of other tools. You know, maybe like a payload or something like that. Extra parts. There are parts in technical group, right? So you know, looking at things in a sort of like a film safe. I can go in and, you know, just look at my different cameras. So I have for this entire project like 3 different camera setups, and I can look at all of those. So if I hit play again, they go all the way down the hall, right? And then they probably stop at the very end. And let me pause this for a second because I actually want to change camera view back to the main camera, and this is main camera look, right? So how you saw it. So with depth of field, you know, I just barely at the start sort of get some silhouette going, and then it's sharper in frame, right in the middle. And then the way that it was edited, you saw another render clip from a different camera showing the back, right? So if I pause it there and I kind of go look at it from the other side, let's go back to the other room here. It's kind of an interesting look. And I actually mixed a few pieces here. The main part of the corridor I produced from Box Cutter, but Box Cutter's creator, Master Xeon, actually did the end of the hall chamber here. His panels I used to, I was like, oh man, dude, those walls are freaking awesome. So let me grab them really quick. And I grabbed them. And it composed a different shaped room than the one that I think he actually originally built it for, but it turned out to be like this great, like, sort of abstract sort of wall pieces, because I stuck an emissive in between the empty areas. It became like a nice sort of backlit panel, and then just to sort of end all of the warmth of the hallway, I threw in some strips that were cooler to sort of cause like a cool, warm balance in between the 2 focal areas, right? So I'm just going to zoom in here and just bring that into focus and look at this door. Now you might say that's a big door. It's an airlock door. It's pretty big. But it's just half of the hatch, right? And I think the doors can actually animate and slide apart. I have a rig file for it, so I'm going to probably be doing that. But eventually what they'll be doing is they'll step through this door, which I have just mounted on the wall now, so I'll have to cut like a portion through the geometry on the other side and make it so that they can actually step through. But this entire thing was also just very quickly re-textured for this render using Quixel. And some of these materials, they look a little weird, you know, from here, but if I was to take them in other places like cinema and stuff like that, they actually look a little bit sharper as PBR materials. But just use quick PBRs to kind of put it on there and give this room, you know, ambience, because you're presuming that you see them walk into the room, and then probably a hatch would open up and they'd walk through another chamber. And so that other chamber will eventually oh heck, did I close it? I did. I did. Hot damn. Okay, so let's just calm down. I'm gonna go back over here and open this. Not that. Nope, I'm gonna have to open it again. Anyway, I'm not gonna worry about it. But the scene that the cargo scene that you guys saw me building was pretty much kind of how I had put together a lot of these scenes. So, you know, just going through, yeah, try saving some of these animations from Mixamo. You guys should be doing your own characters that you can sort of put some motion to. And then, you know, if you put it in there, as long as it's sort of like a humanoid shape, I wouldn't go crazy trying to do a lot of hard surface like humanoid shapes and then throwing them into Mixamo, because the more objects that you have, the more difficult it is, and it would actually bend and get kind of funky. So if you have like just like a solid shelled humanoid form, where it can read actually fingers, arm joints, elbow joint, shoulder, hip, spine, head, and feet. It'll actually give you some really accurate rigs for your models. I found that after porting it, here I'll just open up this for example, and I can show you. So yes, you are able to edit the animations in Marmoset. You can actually edit it by the keyframe and the curve on the keyframe. I've actually seen a really good video that the Marmoset guys put together very recently. I think it's like a fox character, and they're showing how, you know, it can fly around and how other objects can fly around, and actually you can change the smoothness of the toggle of the object, you know, while it's in animation by changing the curve structure of it, that sort of thing. Question number 2, is that an emissive map used on the inside of the walls, the floor, the yellow bits? Yes, it is. And then with the power of bloom and also the motion blur, or like actually it's DOF, it's depth of field blurring that I used, you can actually get it to sort of get like a nice hot glowy color. I can show you actually how to set that up. Let's go back over to Toolbag really quick, and actually I'll do a new one. Yes, we'll save that really quick. Alright, and let's see here. So let's see if I can find the same wall piece. Macro corridor scene, set scene. Sorry, it's gonna take me a sec. I actually forgot where I saved the wall piece. I should have had this well more handy to grab. But give me just 1 second. Test export. Nope, 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 nope. Ah, here we go. Okay, so sorry about that. Sorry for the wait. So I'm just going to open up one sectional piece of that wall. Sometimes OBJs take a second to load up if they're heavy, I think, or have some crazy cuts. Not sure why that guy's not loading though. Hold on a second. Let's get this guy ended since it's not responding. And let me restart it. Sorry about the wait. Hi, how do you do, Kitsune? Thank you for watching. Alright, so got this back up and running. So I'm just going to take, what was the mesh before? I thought I had it open in a window. Pop, pop. Let's see, corridor for export. Tighten corridor. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to keep that handy aside. Go over to Marmoset and just take this, drag and drop. Will it work? Or will it crash? Please don't crash. My nose tickles like it's gonna crash. It's weird. I can smell it. Come on already. Maybe if I close some other stuff. I got a lot of stuff going on. Actually, I'll come back to C4D a little bit later. But anyway, while that's going and trying to actually import, I'm actually going to open up my other Blender project that I had going, because I closed it before, and I'm going to open it back up. For some reason, it did not save my last in here. Oh boy. Okay, so let me open that up. Oh boy, boy, boy. Recent files that didn't save as recent files for some reason. I don't dig that. Let's recover from autosave. There we go. Bay 12, please. Man, my machine must be working in between the streaming and stuff. Ah, there we go. Okay, so back up. Back in business. There we go. So, basically, I wanted to show you guys this file today. We're going to be talking about this more in the future. But what I'm building here, and I'll be actually building some parts from ZBrush for this. After I've explained this, I'm going to take like maybe the last 20 minutes of our show today and start to build some assets for this, so that you can kind of see what I'm doing. But I'm going to bring them back into Blender from ZBrush. So basically ZBrush is like the creator, and I'm using Blender as sort of like the finisher for a lot of objects. So I'm finishing off, you know, stuff just as far as like a composition, like doing a lot of placements because they're very light here. So right now I have just a low quality like viewport render going on, and I can use Alt V to change it. So if I use EV low quality, it's going to be really fast. High quality, some of the viewport is going to be a little bit slower. So I'm going to hit Alt V again and go high Q. It might take a second to apply it, but it's working. And then of course I'm viewing everything in solid view right now, so it's actually going to be pretty slow. It's not going to be very fast. A lot of the shadows are very crisp and they're high res, so they take a little bit time, to display. But also I can toggle this over to rendered, and with rendered I have like some really nice lights that are starting to form. I think I need to spread them around a little bit. And we'll get some different colored lights in there to affect the background. And of course, when I use an HDRI, a lot of these things they'll start to take on a lot different of a shape. Oh man, I gotta switch back to low because this is kind of choppy. Machine's freezing up just a little bit. So, and a lot of the properties panel is where you can, you know, start to change, you know, the resolution of what you're putting down. And so let's actually switch this down just a little bit because it's really high. I'm gonna Alt V again. Oops. I'm gonna Alt V again, and I'm just gonna use EV LQ, which would be low quality, and that becomes a little bit faster. The only thing is you know, while we're operating in speed, a lot of the effects of like bloom and some of the shadow richness and depth is going to look a little bit choppier because it's actually kicking it down to its lowest resolution, right? So I suppose properties, you can actually go and change the render quality a little bit. So like if you have ambient occlusion, you can, you know, change the distance and whatnot like that. Any of the bloom settings you can change here. Let's see, subsurface or screen space reflections, I like that one, or refraction. And then let's see, volumetric. But volumetric, actually you have to put a couple of nodes together to start using EV's volumetric stuff. But basically what I'm doing is just putting the stage together. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to compose it, I may go around the scene and see what kind of like cameras I'm setting up. I've got some objects with like decals here that from my decal kit that I put together, and maybe this is like an interface or gateway, and then walking into, you know, an actual shuttle bay. Right. Transitions. You know what's funny story is I've been using ZBrush for a long time. At least now I have, I guess, and I still feel like I'm studying it. But I started learning in what was that? 2010, 2008 through 2010, and then kept going and still, you know, keeping it going with ZBrush. But then I started to branch out into other applications and use a lot of other like standardized like 3D applications. And then finally, from like say Maya, I jumped into Blender 2.79, right? Which is probably, you know, many would agree, a masterpiece of a version, right? But then 2.8 rolled around and into its public beta program, and it's been great. It's been a great ride. A lot of the tools that I like to use are starting to move into it. A lot of cool add-ons and whatnot, just like Jerry's box cutter or Team C and MX1001. And they made some great tools for this. And it just so happens that there's this sort of synergy between them and a lot of the stuff that I'm doing in ZBrush, especially in the areas of trying to create like sci-fi assets, right? And so some of these are low and some of them can get really quite complex, but I love trying to build some kind of like staging, you know, movie set. Like this, the computer provides the movie set. I don't need a budget. I don't need, you know, live actors. I could actually make everything that I needed to do right from here, and I kind of love the sense of being able to, you know, freely be able to compose a lot of this stuff. But yeah, I've been using 2.8 probably since the beta dropped. 7.9 probably since last summer, and just started to cram and start to pick up some things. Guys, most noticeable guys that, you know, use Blender that, you know, you can probably learn from. Von Ling is one artist who probably you should definitely check out if you're into Blender, because he's kind of the man around his Blender. But he has some really cool tutorials and whatnot that I think you should check out if you ever get a chance. Thank you. Trying to make it awesome. So a lot of these things, you know, I'll be placing other objects in here, and some of that stuff will be objects that you guys have probably seen but recustomized and repurposed for this scene, and drawn into sort of a larger narrative. But basically a lot of the pieces are pretty easy to put together. I used just a couple of different kits to compose the back wall and hatches. Some of these pieces, actually, the frameworks come from Jama Jurabayev, who is an awesome concept artist. If you know Jama, he also is heavily influenced by using Blender in his concepting work. He uses grease pencil a lot. Some really cool stuff. But he did a tutorial a while back ago that had some really nice framework pieces that I've used to sort of customize into like a space station landing bay. Also, you know, super inspired by like old school stuff like Ralph McQuarrie in his Star Wars concept art from the early years, like, you know, New Hope, when that was first being drafted. There was long before CG, and just look at a lot of those like very sort of almost brutalist shapes and sort of like utilitarian motifs in just the scope of having a perspective door, hatch, ship, small humans, you know, interacting and populating the scene, that sort of thing, right? And so now we sort of move, you know, just from the execution more into just, you know, hey, what can I take and put together and compose into a nice framing, right? And so it becomes more of sort of setting up your own cinematic eye, right? If you notice, there's a similar style even in the ceiling. Let me see if I can get this to poke through a little bit. Oh, whoops. There we go. So in the ceiling, some of these ceiling pieces are some of the same pieces that came off of the hallway, the actual chamber at the end of the hallway. in which emissives were placed through the top. So I haven't put much emissives at the top of this, but I'm just putting like aerial lights up in the rafters, up in the framework at the top, and it sort of makes like a nice flush, spooky, you know, sort of space station kind of look. Maybe I'll add some other hinted lights like red or green around, just to sort of spread the atmosphere around a little bit. Some of these actually you've seen. I think a lot of in previous streams I might have used this little jump ship here, but I have additionally another that I'm going to actually put into the scene. So there'll be two types of drop ships, and then I want to populate the scene and make it really big, and so I'll start adding some of those ZBrush sculpted Mixamo animations and putting them in here, making the scene look populated, look lived in. You know, from anything from like working poses to walking, running across the floor, that sort of thing. And when you look at it as a whole, it all looks a little bit more natural, right? And so we'll get this going inside of Marmoset, but I'll have to actually take chunks of this, save them out, export them, relay this out, or take the actual background scene and start separating a few pieces just to keep it lighter between floor, ceiling, rafter section or beams, the ship itself, and then other miscellaneous props that I'll propagate along the scene, right? So sort of the object will be that I'll take this model and use it as reference. Even if I have animations, I can use this as a hard rendered plate and then just green screen the rest out and put it into After Effects. So pretty much everything else will be like sort of like an image sequence. And then finally, after you've done your ZBrushing, your modeling in Blender, you have your assets, you've created an animated scene. So what do you do with it? Okay, so finally, as I mentioned in Marmoset, here I'm going to switch back over. I had these guys, right? And so basically this is just like probably an unshaded view of this scene, but you can kind of see how everything came out. In fact, actually not all of the maps are in on this, so this is just everything's smooth, but some of the textures have been embedded on it. This mech back here is still static. I haven't really rigged it yet, but probably we're going to use it as sort of like a big dog type of mech character, you know, where it will haul something or maybe do a little combat assisted by a pilot, you know. But we'll see, you know, we'll see. I don't want to give it away. But anyway, yeah, a lot of these pieces here, as you can see, there are material definitions on the mesh. So if I click here, actually in this list here, there are different mesh definitions that I can just, you know, click on one, go to the material, and just to show, oh wow, I had quite a few of those. I'll just come down here to emissive, click here, and select emissive, and then there will be a color and then a glow color. The more powerful seems to be the glow color, but I'll just go ahead and set this. So if I set this to like a sort of really hot, cool cyan color, maybe a little bit deeper blue, and then I set the glow maybe a little bit hotter, you can get something like that. And then along with your render or camera effects, you can show local reflections, internal reflections, shadow resolution high, I'll keep going down, ambient occlusion, which is basically only screen space to be quite correct. And then I'll go down the list, and with camera, I believe down here you can adjust the bloom. And so as soon as I give it a little bit more bloom or depth of field, these glowing areas start to pop on their strength, right? So I could actually turn the intensity up and make it really hot, right? But I would be careful of the balance, because every once in a while you can get rendered fireflies from the degaussing or what have you. Take this back, dial it back maybe, and then just turn the intensity up just a little bit more. Maybe you might be able to get a nice balance. A lot of these other things don't have materials on it, so it looks a little weird, but pretty much that's the gist of it, right? All textured up, it should look pretty good, right? Okay, so let's take that. And then again, of course, I showed the keyframes. So every time that I had like a large crowd that was walking, essentially what I'm doing is moving the crowd and their cycle to the end of the hall, setting a keyframe, and then to the very end, setting a keyframe and moving the entire group of walking characters to the end. And then all I had to do was just fill in the keyframes in between. So in other words, maybe incremental movements, saving a keyframe with each step. So like maybe 1, 2, 3 with the beats of everything, right? And then it would just stop and terminate once everyone has left the main corridor. Right? Do I have any rigging and animating tutorials for Blender? That I don't. And actually, you know what? I am not a professional rigger at all. It's actually a little bit beyond me, but I'm familiar with it and can probably move the controllers around if it's rigged. But actually, building IK bones yet, I still have to find out for myself. And I'm sure it's just a matter of process and trying to practice it and actually use it. But they're out there. Especially on YouTube, you could probably find a lot of Blender, quick tips and instructional videos. The Blender community is actually really quite large, and they have a lot of wikis where you can look up just even the simplest of things. So keep your eyes peeled. I would say in between like the Blender community site or forum and also YouTube, you can find out a lot. Right? Okay, wow. So I've chatted it up actually a little bit longer than I thought I would. But let's just go through and make a few pieces, because I actually did want to make something today in this that I could use. So I'm going to take this. Let's make a cube. Let's make a cube. Start with a cube. Cubes are good, right? Why not? So we're going to take this, and I'm going to make polymesh 3D with it. Actually, I think the star is the only polymesh in there. But you can take this and just not have to use polymesh 3D button, but just go straight away from a star. And then I believe if you come down and initialize it, you can actually initialize it into a Q cube for being handy sake. Then you could just size it up. Do this, make it a little bit thinner, and pull it out just a little bit that way. There we go. And I'm going to hit BZ, get the ZModeler tool out, and I'm actually going to hit spacebar, and I'm going to insert an edge, so here, and I'm actually going to take this edge and this edge, and I suppose I will Q mesh them out, single poly, quarter step, right? And then, of course, with masking, I think I've showed you guys a lot of this kind of stuff where if you're using ZModeler on a Q mesh or something like that, you can actually just select a lot of the mesh by the vertex, and then, what's left unmasked, you can basically, here, I'll mask this, and this point should be unmasked. And then if I use the widget and I just place this here, I should be able to just move that entire row of vertices, right? And get like a special shape or a custom shape if I want to. So when I do something like have like another wall piece, and then I'll take this guy and this guy, lift that up just a little bit more, and then I'll take this and do an insert, this and this. Pull this out. And if I line these up, what I'll basically be able to do is make a nice new corridor piece just out of this frame, right? So I'll just mask this, and then I'll use the move tool again, and I'm holding Alt and actually moving the widget around and placing it to a point where I want to move. Right? So with something like this I'll now take to box cutter, right, and start cutting up on. I mean, I could do it here in ZBrush, but I think probably a little bit more of a process. I can actually do it faster there. So I'm just going to take save this half piece out. Actually, no. Oops. Let's take a look at export. I'm actually going to make this all one poly group. I'm not going to save any smaller groups. I'll make it quad. There's no ingons in this yet, I don't think. So I'll just take the one piece, export it. It'll be an OBJ. Okay, and I'll save this. And then I'll flip over to Blender. Oops. And we'll just make a new Blender window. Launch another Blender. That's the cool thing about it, is I can actually take that thing and open like 5 different instances in ZBrush and I'll be good all day. How to pose in the final scene? Well, you know, it's actually kind of funny, and I've learned this while I'm talking about Mixamo. Mixamo could actually do in a complete cycle, like a walk cycle of a character, right? Which is really cool. But what happens is the interesting mistakes that you get for posing when you pause the actual playable FBX rig, right? And get those in-between moments that are most natural, because a lot of the pose data actually comes from actual mocap of a scanned actor who's acting out in the suit, and then they take that rig and they apply it towards like some 3D models that you can customize and put on your 3D models, right? So if you catch the half movement of something like somebody running, and it's 3 steps to the run and they're this way, and you catch it right at the peak and hold it there, you can actually export that out as an OBJ, put your maps back on, and then you have something that's posed, you know, like in a more natural running pose than you would probably try to do by actually just moving the rig and the actual character around. So you can use it as a nice starting point to really get a nice pose, actually. What was I going to open up? I have about 10 minutes left on this. Ah, yes, so I was going to bring in that actual piece that was going on. Import, and it was OBJ, and in here, and I believe it was like test, corridor test, or corridor. As soon as I can actually find it. Section test, there we go. And I'll take that OBJ and import it, and there it is, right? And so now, this, and I'll just do like a cut for one, so that's one cut, and then take another, hide that, and since I made this cut on this side, what I'm going to actually do is Alt X, copy it onto the other side, and do the same for this, Alt X, cut it on that side along the Y. So everything I do on this Y will happen on this Y, right? And so I'll get the actual benefit of the symmetry between there. Let's take this, and I'll take this, and maybe do one of these. right? And this I can actually fix later. I can actually put like a loop or something like that and just contiguously connect from one line to the other. But you know, you start doing a few chops, and then you start getting a sort of like a detailed, I can't talk today. Detailed wall. Sorry, my sinuses are giving me some problems this afternoon. This weather is being really crazy here in LA these days. It's like spring, not spring, spring, not spring. But anyway, moving right along. Let's, do a cut right there. And that's going to be a slice. And of course, again, be careful of, but not, you know, you're not limited to not using it. But I'm going to hit Q, do a C sharpen, Q, B, do a B with, here, Q, C sharpen, Q, B, B with, right? I can bevel this, so I will shift click it and then hide the shape. And so basically all of those hidden shapes will become cutters. And if I ever needed to edit them again, the cool thing about working from that from the start is if I hit Alt H, it unhides everything that's hidden, and I can see these shapes, and I can further like take them and move them around, right? So like if I Alt H again, oops, actually let me escape that, then Alt H, there we go, and I grab one, and let's say, you know, I decide I want to scale it a different way. Maybe like this, right? Or take this one and move it. Or if I want to edit the actual hidden box. Now here's the golden gem behind this, is that say this shape here, it's just a flat box, and I want to make it more interesting. So if I take it from the edges and I actually tab into this shape and edit it, like I can undo it all, or unselect it all actually, sorry, grab the vert, actually put maybe like a bevel on here or something like that. Do something like that, and tab out of it, and hit move it along the Y. And actually, come to think of it, I think this box was actually destructive, so it's actually in the mesh. Yeah, it's actually in the mesh already, so I can actually delete this. Just delete it and come back and work with this shape, right? And of course, all of this you can look and use look dev. Kind of some cool things while you're sculpting is you can bring up some of the material properties, like if you hit Alt V, you can change this. It's basically almost like a matte cap. You know, you can get some warm or outdoor styled ones, or like studio ones are really cool. Matte cap, and then plus adding AO, soft shadows, all of the good screen space stuff that makes it look pretty, and then you can go from here, and it's actually a little bit more understandable what kind of cuts you're making by the end, right? Okay guys, I went over a little bit, it's 6, but I'm gonna have to kill it there. But join me next time. Actually, I'm gonna try to come back a little bit sooner next time for another stream, and we'll cover some stuff and kind of go from scratch, because I'm gonna be building some parts over the week when or maybe over the next 2 weeks when I'm not streaming with you guys. But when I come back, I'm probably going to have a lot more to talk about as far as a lot of the shaping, and hopefully I'll cut into a few more features in ZBrush 2019. So starting with ZRemesh and also the folders, I think I'm going to be using also some of this new spotlight features, sort of silhouetting some hard surface pieces. cheers. Thanks, you guys. Thanks again, and have yourselves a wonderful weekend. I wish you all the best. Namaste. Have a good one. Happy weekend. Cheers, guys. Thanks for joining me. Take care.